Prabha, we are live and we are recording the meeting. You can start.
Hey, thank you. Well, welcome everybody to the PCAC meeting. Today is Wednesday, February 28th, 2024. We have some new people here, some new members. Welcome everybody. I'm going to start by calling the roll. Council member Sonia Miles and board member Susan Cunningham. Thank you. Supervisor Walter Alcorn. Supervisor Sylvia Glass, Supervisor Margaret Angela Franklin is here, and Council Member Sarah Bagley is supposed to be joining us remotely, but she's not with us yet.
She hasn't joined yet.
Not yet. Okay. And the Council Member Justine Underhill, Council Member John Steely, Council Member Ralph Smith, Council Member Vice Mayor Alana Mensing, Vice Mayor Clark Hedrick, and Council Member Carrie Nancy here, and Mayor Stanley Milan. Good to see you all. And we're going to start with member orientation by our CEO.
Thank you, Chair Cobra. So good evening, everyone. I will be brief because those of you who have been on the committee previously, you are well aware of this. And for the new members, we can go into a detailed NVTA orientation if you so choose at a date certain later than tonight. In front of you is the authority's 2023 annual report. And that's really what I want to walk through because it is all things NVTA essentially. The authority is a 17-member body. We have the 9-member jurisdictions, which are the 4 counties, 5 cities. And then we have 2 members appointed by the Speaker of the House. I have to be clear about this. They're not necessarily members of the House, but they are 2 people appointed by the Speaker of the House. And then we have 1 state senator. Then we have 2 gubernatorial appointees. One must be a member of the Commonwealth Transportation Board, and then the other is a citizen that is not a member of the CTB. That other position actually is the only position that have term limits on the authority. That other gubernatorial position is a 4-year term. Now, of course, some of the mayors and chairs positions could be term limited as well, depending on how elections go. We also have 1 voting member from one of the 5 towns with a population of 3,500, or non-voting, with a population of 3,500 or more. The reason why that position is non-voting, because residents of a town do get to vote for the county chair. So it stays in line with 1 man, 1 vote. But as we always say, not having a vote doesn't mean you don't have a say. And if you have questions about that, please ask Mayor Derek Wood, the mayor of the town of Dumfries, who is our previous representative for representing the town. And then we have the Commissioner of Highways, or his or her designee. The commissioner, since I've been involved with NVTA, has always chosen his designee as the VDOT Nova District Administrator. And then we have the head of the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. So that gets us to our 17 members. The authority, by law, we have 2 statutory committees. You are sitting in one of them, the Planning Coordination Advisory Committee. This committee is comprised of 14 members. It's the 9 cities and counties, and then the 5 towns with the population of 3,500 or more. The membership doesn't overlap because if your mayor or chair is on the authority, then you have a different member representing your city, county, or town here at the PCAC. And then we have a technical advisory committee. The TAC, as we call it, is a 9-member entity of citizen experts throughout the region, citizen transportation experts throughout the region. The law says that the chair of the CTB, which is also the Secretary of Transportation, appoints 3 members, and 6 members are appointed by localities embraced by the authority. We actually have a bill in to clarify, stating that the authority is the entity that appoints those members. So the 2 statutory committees. Then we have 3 standing committees, and I know this a lot, so I'm just doing high level. Our standing committees, we have a planning and programming committee. That planning and programming committee does work that you do essentially when we are doing our long-range transportation plan update or the 6-year program update, then that's when that committee meets. The standing committees of the authority have 5 authority members. Now, while the meetings are all open to the public, open to other authority members, but when it gets to recommendations, and that's the key word, it's a 5-member committee. All committees make recommendations. All decisions, final decisions lie with the authority. So we have the planning and programming committee. We have the finance committee. Now that's a committee that meets on a regular. They have a monthly meeting scheduled for the most part. And then we have the governance and personnel committee. That committee meets during session, right before session, during session, and maybe a meeting after session. And then we're on hiatus until we have to start it all over again. Any questions about the committee structures or the composition of the authority? Okay, so getting to the annual report. And these are my notes, so I can take these little tabs off. So the authority, we have revenue streams. We've existed since 2002, but we didn't have funding until 2013. That was with the passage of HB 2313. So we have 4 revenue streams currently, and I won't get into how we got all 4 and what happened before. We get sales tax, we get money from grantors tax, we get money from, I think the technical term is the Interstate Operations and Maintenance, or Interstate Operations Enhancement Program funds, formerly known as I-81. When the General Assembly put money in for several interstates, we received some money from that. And then we get 20 million off the top from the Commonwealth. Our revenues are split into 2. 70% goes to the authority for regional transportation projects. The law requires that any project that we fund with the regional revenues must be in our long-range transportation plan. And then the localities get 30%. The 30% is receipt-based. So whatever we receive from your locality, you get back 30%, provided that you meet the maintenance of effort provision. We've been doing this for 10 years, going on 11 to date. Everyone has met the certification requirements. That makes me happy, because when you don't, that money that would be rightfully yours rolls into the 70% pie, and there's nothing we can do. So, and I will say, the end of last year, I think it was October, we celebrated distributing $1 billion in 30% funds. When we do our funding programs, we do them biannually. You'll hear about the one we're working on this evening. We do an economic impact analysis. So every 2 years when we do a funding program, we do an economic impact analysis, and we contract that work out. We do not do it in-house, so we can have an independent firm, so no one can say you're cooking the books to make yourselves look good. And those revenues, and it really gets into our investments. To date, the $4.1 billion we've invested, because that's the $1 billion from the 30%. And then with the 70%, we funded 122 projects totaling $3.1 billion. So that $4.1 billion results in 400 million hours of travel time savings by 2035 and 42,000 new jobs. So there is a direct connection between transportation investments and the impact on the economy. While we have a lot of responsibilities under the law, the 2 that we do every single time, every single planning cycle, is the planning and the programming. We do the 6-year program, we do transaction, which is our long-range plan. We update that every 5 years. And even though it says, I should say the authority adopts it every 5 years, for us, it's like an every 2.5 year effort. And then this last page on the internal cover, it just gives you an example of some of the investments around the region. We have qualitative and quantitative criteria we use when we're making these investments. We strive to achieve geographic balance and modal distribution. The law requires us to give priority to projects that have the greatest level of congestion reduction relative to cost, but we've been able to do that and fund multimodal projects. And then there are other things we do. I won't get into that. You'll hear more about it at a later time, so not along the meeting. But if you have any questions, because that was the high-level, very condensed Cliff Notes version, please give me a call. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Hey, thank you so much. That was excellent. Okay, does anyone have questions at this point? Okay, excellent. And if you had a chance to look at the summary notes, I know not everyone at the table was at that meeting, but the meeting notes from November 16th, 2022, I can't believe it's been that long since we met. I'm looking at that day, like, really? But I did look at them. I'm okay with them. Does anybody have any changes to those notes? Okay, all in favor, say aye. All right, those are passed. Approve the meeting calendar. So the meeting calendar is attached, I believe, here. Yes, on the back page here. March, April, May, June, July, we don't meet in August, and then September and October. Does anybody have any questions about that? Does that look okay? That looks fine. Right, and then November and December, that's good to see that we'll just wait. That's always better. We try and make it, it won't work. Okay, is there a motion? Okay, all in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay, those pass. Excellent. Okay, 6-year program update.
Thank you, Jacob, and members of the committee. I'm Sri Nabudri, Senior Manager here at PCAC with the planning team. I'll briefly go through, Monica mentioned several of these things, so I will try to be as short as possible and get this moving. We are in the process of updating our 6-year program, what we call the fiscal year 24 to 29 program. When we say that 6 years, we are looking at the revenues from the last 2 years of that 6 years. So we are looking at fiscal year 28 and 29 projected revenue to be allocated to projects. That's what we are looking at. Monica already mentioned 2 things that we always do: transaction, the long range plan update, and the 6-year program update. NVTA has adopted certain visions and goals and core values. Goals: enhancing mobility, increasing accessibility, and improving resiliency. That's what we want to achieve. And core values of equity, safety, and sustainability. That is how we want to achieve these goals. Next one, please. Those goals are then expanded to objectives and measures, 10 performance measures. They are weighted. You can see it on that table. The statutory committees and authority, including this statutory committee, approved this performance measures and the weights 2 years back when you were working on this. You can also see how these goals and measures, they align with the 3 core values authority have adopted. Next slide, please. You can skip that. That's the same thing. Here's a history of all the 6 funding programs authority has adopted so far. You can see at that total funding to date row, and the columns are showing how much funding was requested and how much was approved based on how much money was available. You look at the percentage column, the last one, you see we only have about 50% of the money that everyone wants. So we cannot fund all the projects. The last row there shows how much is requested this round, close to $1 billion. If anything, the past trend we look at it, we think we will have about 500 to 600 million for allocating. We don't have that number yet. Our finance team is still working on that. So obviously we don't have the full money to fund all these projects. Next one, please. So we had to go through a selection process. I will just walk you through this process. Next several slides go through the details, but if you have any questions, I can come back to those details later. But I will walk you through this one. First thing is eligibility. Initially, we said we have two responsibilities, preparing the long-range plan and then the 6-year program funding. First thing is when you prepare the long-range plan, we identify a list of projects in that. First, eligibility criteria is that the application you are submitting, that project should be listed in long-range plan. It could be the entire project, it could be a part of that project, it could be a combination of multiple projects, but the scope of the application should match with that project or projects in long-range plan. Physically, it has to be located in Northern Virginia. And third one is governing body resolution. We want to make sure that whoever is submitting the application, their governing body has seen this application, went through the details, understand it, and support that submission. We have gone through all that process already for this cycle. And we have 24 candidate projects right now. And then we do a series of analysis, both quantitative measures and qualitative measures. That gives us from various angles how these projects are performing on its own and compared to each other. Go through them in brief. Quantitative, we look at 3 different measures. First one is congestion reduction relative to cost, what we call CRRC. This is a legally required measure. By law, authority is supposed to give preference to that measure. It doesn't say that's only measure, but preference to that measure. What we do is we have transportation models, the software where we can represent the transportation network, population, employment, all those things, how people travel, and we can run the model. We do it for 2 different years, 2030 and 2045, and then we get various outputs out of that model. One of them is congestion reduction achieved by each of these projects. We run the model for each project. So we get how the congestion reduction achieved by the project in 2030 and in 2045. We extrapolate it to get into all the in-between years. We add it up from the day the project is expected to complete until 2045 to get a cumulative congestion reduction by that project in that time frame. Divide that by the total project cost. So that's an essentially benefit cost ratio. That's the first one. Second one is you already saw that 10 measures and the weights that we showed. A combined score based on that weighted score. That's what we call transaction rating. That's the second measure we look at. Third one is long-term benefit. This is again a legally required one. The law says, putting it in my own words, in the long term, the jurisdictions should, the share of the benefits, transportation benefits from our investments that each member of the locality gets should be approximately equal to the share of revenues each of these locality brought to the table. So the benefits should approximately equal the revenues, the cost that, the revenue that you bringing in. In the long term is not defined in the law. Benefits is not defined in the law. What is long term? What third one is approximately equal. That is not defined in the law. So authority created a committee, working group of transportation directors mostly back in 2014, and that committee came up with some principles of how this should be done. Staff took that into more analytical methods and see how we can do it. We have been doing it in the past couple of rounds. We look at transportation benefits in 2 ways. One is where the congestion reduction is happening geographically. So we can figure out how much congestion reduction is happening within each jurisdiction. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is who is benefiting from that congestion reduction. So where are the people making those trips live? So based on the origin of those trips. So that way we look at who is actual beneficiary and assign the benefit each of that beneficiary getting into the jurisdiction where they live. So we look at those 2 ways. We combine it with the actual dollar amount went into each jurisdiction. That's how we come up with long-term benefits. Then we go through a series of qualitative considerations. We look at past performance. As Monica mentioned, we already funded 122 projects. How those projects are performing? Are they moving as expected? Are they delayed? Are they submitting the reimbursement requests on time? Those kind of past performance. Do we have money already allocated to this project? That's not a guarantee to get more funding, but that's one of the considerations we look at. Funding gap, is there a large gap, small gap, no gap? That plays into the considerations. External funding, the more money you bring from outside, it's better. So we want to see that. Essentially, we want to make sure that we are leveraging other funding, or you are able to leverage entities. I mentioned about the 3 core values. For the first time this round, we are looking at how each application aligns with those 3 core values. Monica also mentioned about geographic and model balance. We don't want all the funding to go into one part of the region or just one specific mode. We want to make sure it's spread out. Last but not the least, we want to hear from the public what they think about all these applications. So once we have those analysis, everything ready, we put them together. We will have a public comment period. We'll have a public hearing, and we take all that input into the consideration. So with these evaluation results and the public comments, staff will then put together a recommendation for committees to consider first, and then you can endorse this as it is, or you can modify it as you wish, and then it will go to the authority for their adoption. And we can skip the next.
Any questions with that in
Sure.
present at this point?
Go to a couple of more slides, please. At this point, we are not coming up with all the analysis. We are still finishing up that. Wanted to make sure that, especially since we have few new members, we wanted to make sure you all understand the methodology and what is coming in the next couple of months. This is one of the, I think you have a printout of this in a larger shape. So that one shows all the 24 applications. The primary mode they're expected to serve, the secondary modes, the project request, fund requested, and all those details, project cost and things like that. The blue area there is what I mentioned as qualitative considerations, all those measures that it's not coming out of the model or a pure number way. It's looking at different things in high, medium, low levels.
The blue is but not.
Those are the qualitative considerations. That area, it's not a score now. It's just highlighting that area will have all the quality. It will be color coded in sometimes 3 variations or 5 variations, high, medium, low levels.
Right.
The rest of the white columns on the far end, those are the 3 quantitative measures we discussed: CRRC, transaction rating, and long-term benefit. And this list will be sorted by that CRRC, conditional reduction related to cost bank, because by law we have to give preference to that. You first rank it that way, but then you will consider all the other measures when we start developing the recommendations. Next slide. We will also have, if for each project, a 2-page description about the project, the location, cost, and timing, things like that. There is a summary of what we have now. We have it in your packet, so you can see the applications and the results. Next, no, not the results, but just the summary. You just go back to the previous slide. Yeah, we have 24 applications from 10 applicants for a close to 1 billion request. You can see the second table on the next, on this slide that is on the screen. It represents all modes, not just one mode or the other. It is a very good spread across all different modes. Next slide, please. So you have a map on the packet. You can see physically where they are located. Again, it's from all over the region. That's the schedule. The top area with the gray text, that's all completed by now. The evaluation is almost completed. We are putting together all these documents that we showed, that packet. Right now, we want to, in the next meeting, we will bring all that results to you all for review and comments. At the same time, in March authority meeting, we are requesting the authority to approve May 9th as the date for public hearing. That usually public hearing happens on the same night as authority meets. First, we will have the public hearing, then authority will go into their regular business meeting. So we are expecting that meeting to have that public hearing to happen on May 9th. We will start the actual public engagement process, public comment period before that. Probably we are expecting to start in late March and it run through that public hearing date and another couple of weeks, so towards late May. So that much time will be there for public to comment on these projects. During that same time frame, as I mentioned, we will go through all these analysis results and things like that with you. Once the public comment comes in, we will put together the recommended staff recommendations and come to you at your June meeting. That's when we will have all the results in hand. Then we will bring it to you in June. As I said earlier, you can endorse or make changes and recommend your recommendations to the authority. Authority is expected to adopt the program in July.
We do the rankings, that's June.
The ranking will be done based on the analysis.
When we go through and give them the points, you know, that, which meeting is that?
I think you are talking about the ranking you did or the weightage you give for the measures.
Right, for the 10 points.
This time,
15 points.
yeah,
No, we've already done that. Yeah, that's already been done. Okay, got it.
that work is already,
Yeah,
we are not
we've already done
redoing.
that. Yep, okay. Okay. Right, any questions?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, next we have the Transportation Perception Survey. Casper, hello.
Hello. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
It really was November of
I
2022.
know. Where did 2023 go?
We don't like to bring you in for meetings if there's nothing to talk about.
Right,
Absolutely.
All that time there's been nothing to talk about. Now there's a lot to talk about.
Right.
For the next 6 months. But tonight I'm going to just briefly introduce something that's in your packet. So I'm not going to go over this in any detail, but I'm happy to answer questions on any part of this that you may have. So we do a public transportation perceptions survey, or its official name is tracking changes in transportation attitudes and priorities. And we released the most recent survey to NVTA at their meeting earlier this month. We conduct this survey to get independent and objective insights on a range of topics that help us to kind of set a context for our long-range transportation planning efforts, to monitor how well NVTA and the region as a whole is performing on transportation topics, to understand the factors that affect quality of life in Northern Virginia and what is important to Northern Virginians. It also helps us to gain insight in how we enhance our messaging to Northern Virginians and to promote engagement with NVTA, which is particularly important this year since we're doing the 6-year program. It is not a travel survey as such, but we do explore certain travel behaviors and other behaviors that affect travel. The first time we conducted this was in 2015. And since then, we've repeated this survey in 2016, 2019, 2021, and most recently in 2023. Field work was done in December of 2023. So these are the tracking surveys. The 2015 version was the benchmark. So everything is basically kind of is a snapshot in its own right, but also adds to the longitudinal trends that we're monitoring. Some of these tracking surveys include new questions, and that was the case for this most recent one. I'll talk more about that in a moment. So for those new questions, you know, in 2023, that kind of becomes the benchmark for those questions that would then be tracked in subsequent iterations. This time around, the main topic of interest for new questions were related to bus rapid transit, BRT. We did this because we kicked off an initiative late last year, which grew out of the transaction long-range plan, looking at developing a preliminary deployment plan for a regional bus rapid transit system in Northern Virginia. That work kicked off late last year and is ongoing, and I'll have an update on that on the next agenda item. So just very quickly then, the survey is conducted by Heart and Mind Strategies. They've conducted all the surveys, so there's great continuity and consistency in the work. Heart and Mind Strategies is a locally based firm in Reston, but they do have a national and international profile in this sort of work. So mention you've got the whole thing in your packet. But I'm only going to touch on a handful of slides tonight. So Haroon, if you want to go to slide 6. Yeah. So this one is like overarching key findings. And just very quickly, you can read these, but they're worth restating. Northern Virginians, by an overwhelming proportion, consider that investing in regional transportation is a priority for them, and we get something like 90% of the people agreeing with this statement. Commuting habits, we're finding, are still impacted by the pandemic, and now like the new normal is evolving, but we don't believe the new normal is established yet. So that we will continue to see evolve, we think, over the next few years and maybe longer. Safety, as ever, is a priority. It's one of our core values. It kind of popped up a little bit higher, more prominently in this cycle. I'll come to that in just a moment. But that was more to do with crime than safety. But what we found from other research that we've done is residents kind of see those things as interchangeable almost. Whereas we might think about crime and safety in different ways. That's not necessarily the case for Northern Virginians. So we need to be aware of that for the work we do. I mentioned BRT, or bus rapid transit. Northern Virginians have little familiarity with the concept of BRT, but from what we told them about it in the survey, they have a very favorable outlook, and they do see many more benefits than they see drawbacks. And finally, and this is interesting, when it comes to transportation news, Northern Virginians aren't as they're not really hearing as much as they have in previous cycles. We do find that you cycle on cycle, there's less recall of recent news stories pertaining to transportation. We think that may be in part due to the fact that the way people get their news since 2015, when we started doing this survey, and today is different, and they kind of get it in different ways, if indeed they get it at all. And that appears to be a choice, but there are other things happening in the media industry where, people are maybe just tuning out of news as it relates to transportation and more broadly. So we touched on that as well. That's obviously very important for us when we think about messaging, is understanding where people go to get news. We don't want to be sending the news to somewhere where no one's listening. You want to go on to the next one? So I mentioned quality of life, and so but all but one of our cycles, we've asked a question of the sample to tell us just which one of these factors most affects their quality of life. They could only pick one. And the top two, since we've done this, have been reducing congestion and affordability of housing. We've seen in recent cycles of this survey that affordability is now more important than transportation congestion although both are still important. And you see the third row there, reducing crime and making neighborhoods safer is that 14% of people who responded said that was their number one quality of life factor. And that jumped from 8% in the last iteration, where it was pretty stable over all iterations of the survey. In the most recent survey in 2023, that's jumped by 6 points to 14. We don't know if that's a blip, but it certainly can't be ignored. And you know, this could be to do with a reality that some of our survey participants have been victims of crime or know people who have been victims of crime, or it could be a perception of crime, but not necessarily a reality of crime. After the authority meeting, authority members were very interested in this and asked us they asked us a lot of questions that we couldn't answer because the survey is not designed to give the answers to the detailed questions that they were asking us. We do have a way of addressing that in an upcoming phase of the BRT work, which I'll come to. But what we were able to do, at least for this iteration of information, was to look at the 14% of people who said crime was the number one factor, to find out a bit more about who they were and what their travel habits were. And what we found was that the perception doesn't differ depending on the mode that they're using, right? So, you know, there was a thought that it might be transit riders, you know, felt less safe than non-transit riders, or indeed the other way around. But in fact, neither was the case. There was no differentiation based on the mode. The only thing that stood out was that something like 33% of the 14% work in Maryland. We don't have a theory for why that might be the case. At the TAC meeting, one of the TAC members is a professor at George Mason University, and he opines it might be because they're in their cars for a long time and they're listening to transportation news and also picking up other news. They might be hearing stories about crime. So who knows? We don't. These are just theories. But anyway, let's jump on here. So 52 is the next one. So I mentioned earlier we used this survey to kind of gauge how well NVTA and the region is doing in terms of performance related to transportation matters. And it's good news across the board here. A lot of the data on here, I apologize, but if you look at the colorful part of the main part of the graphic here with the colored bars, that there's the top group of 5 are related to Northern Virginia and as a whole, and the bottom 5 are related to NVTA. And essentially, the shades of green are indicating either a good or excellent response to the question, how's the region doing? So you'll see that looking at the region as a whole, when we did this first time in 2015, it was good, excellent was 27%, and that's steadily risen to now in 2023 for the first time, it's above 50%. So more people feel that the region's doing a good job than a bad job. NVTA, for whatever reason, reached that like milestone in 2021 when we got to 58%. Said our performance was good or excellent. And this is among people who know NVTA. So it's not everyone in the sample, because some people self-declared they don't know NVTA. So we didn't ask them how we were doing because that would clearly be pointless or certainly misleading. So our performance has notched up from 58 to 59% in the last cycle as well. So I mean, you should take some of the credit for this as well because you're all involved in transportation. When we say the region, we're not being specific to us or any jurisdictional agency. It's the region as a whole is doing a good job, but there's more work to be done. So with that, I think that was my last slide that I'm going to draw on right now. I've got 5 slides I'm going to go back to that are related specifically to the BRT initiative, which is the next agenda item. But I can pause there if there's any questions on the reception survey as a whole.
Anyone? Questions or comments? Okay, that was interesting.
Okay, so let's go back to slide 25. So I just want to touch on the next agenda item here, which is to do with the preliminary deployment plan for bus rapid transit. 25, yeah. So we started off by asking folks about what bus system initiatives they'd even heard of. We offered them options to indicate their familiarity with the Metroway Potomac Yard line, which is an operational BRT system, the Richmond Highway Bus Rapid Transit System, which is in design at the moment, but not yet. I think it's actually, it's in right-of-way acquisition, but it's not yet in construction itself. WMATA's Better Bus Network redesign study, Envision Route 7 transit study, which is a collaboration coordinated by the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission that involves Fairfax County, the City of Falls Church, Arlington, and Alexandria. So that's Envision Route 7 and other bus system improvements, if there were others that we didn't include by name. And by far the greatest response was none of the above. So not a great surprise, and it's not in any way to be critical of those initiatives. It's simply to get a measure of how, in our sample, how people are familiar with transit initiatives in general. Moving on to the next slide, then we asked about familiarity with BRT, and in that box to the left, you can see how we described BRT. High quality bus-based transit system delivering fast, frequent, reliable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we asked them to consider that and then tell us, firstly, how familiar you are with that and then secondly, how favorable you feel about that. So in the middle block or the left of the two graphics, the extremely familiar and very familiar total was 12%. And the plurality response was not at all familiar. But that's not a great surprise, particularly given the response to the previous question. And then on the right, you see how favorable people are towards that description of BRT. And they're the very and somewhat favorable of 51%. And the bulk of the rest, 41%, are neutral. So interested but undecided. Only a handful, less than 10%, had some degree of unfavorability related to that description of BRT. So it kind of means we're starting in a good place. There's a receptiveness towards it, but that's a long way from saying people will use it, let alone be successful in reducing traffic congestion or achieving our other goals. So on this next slide, we asked people to kind of weigh up, on balance, negativity versus positivity, and you can see here, positivity was pretty much off the charts in terms of that's where people are. So that was good. And then I think one more in this group. I know we have two more. So we asked people, thinking about their own personal travel behaviors, how they would potentially use a BRT system if there was one available to them. And this was kind of interesting. 54% said extremely, very, or somewhat likely to use for commuting purposes, 54%. But the interesting part is that 63% has said that they would use it for recreational personal travel needs, which is really what we need, because a BRT system has to be an all-day system. It can't just be a peak period system. So if you've got more people indicating, potential willingness to use at times of day, which is not associated with peak travel, then that indicates there's the basis of something that could be an all-day service. In terms of whether or not I'm surprised with this, I think one statistic to keep in mind is that when it comes to commute versus non-commute travel in Northern Virginia, something like 3/4 of the trips that are made are not commute trips. I mean, it may seem surprising, maybe not, but the peak travel demand is a quarter of all trips. You want to go to the next one? So what were the things that most influenced people in terms of seeing benefits? And we've indicated the top three here: convenience, travel time savings compared to driving, faster and more reliable trips. And then, you know, progressively you see fewer and fewer people for other factors, but still, you know, some recognition of those other factors. Obviously, it's like everything with transportation. It's a very personal thing. It's like 2 million people making decisions on their travel needs, and this, you know, is no different in that regard. So this is from the perception survey. I wanted to kind of show you this to introduce you to the next part. You put up the slide deck you have for the PDP. So I'll just say while Haroon's doing that, I mentioned earlier that this preliminary deployment plan is something that grew out of our long range plan. And it's kind of like a bridging step between long range planning, where for us, that's fiscally and geographically unconstrained. There's no financial commitment on anyone's part having a project in transaction, a long range plan. The financial commitments are in our 6-year program. But what this preliminary deployment plan, and excuse me if I call it PDP, because that's kind of like our internal jargon. We're trying to come up with a better name, but we're not there yet. But so with this PDP, it kind of is a bridge between the fiscally unconstrained plan and the fiscally constrained 6-year program, with some various philosophies in mind. Chief among them is think big, start small, build momentum. Okay, we know a BRT system is not going to magically appear overnight or even over a couple of years. I mean, we're still probably talking about a couple of decades. But the starting small piece has already happened. NVTA is already funding some or all 5 BRT lines which are in operation or development in Northern Virginia today. Every one of them has got a flavor of NVTA money on it, to the tune of almost $500 million. So I say think small, but for us, think small is almost $500 million already invested in those projects. Transaction has projects that be very complementary, and indeed, we have a graphic. Oh, these are the existing lines you're showing here. Okay, so this is the existing coverage you're showing in this map. A long range plan, as I think mentioned in the second bullet there, there's $10 billion worth of projects that would fit with this BRT system potentially. We don't have $10 billion, but what we want to do is make sure that having already invested $500 million, we get the maximum return on those projects, not just as standalone projects, but the synergies of individual lines interacting with each other in much the same way that the different colored lines on Metro Rail interact with each other as a system, which means it isn't just about what you can catch, you know, near your house or your business or whatever, but what can you connect to with something else, including Metro Rail or VRE or other bus service. So we want to make sure that if we invest in something like that, we're not going to constrain the ability of a system to achieve those synergies by designing each individual line in a way that it cannot integrate with other lines. We'd still get benefits from doing that, but we would eliminate the opportunity to get synergies if we did that. And certainly for future investments, when we're asked to put more money into BRT, which we've obviously shown a willingness to do. And I think there's a couple of projects in this current 6-year program cycle which are related to a couple of the BRT lines that are on this map here. So it's already starting, but we want to make sure that it's all going to fit together. We do not want to put, in much the same way that the Federal Highway Administration would not want you to build interstates that didn't match state lines or have signage that was different in Virginia and Maryland, thereby confusing people who get used to one system in one state and then it's a completely different system in another state. And this is no different. We want a system that looks like a system as opposed to a bunch of unconnected, unrelated lines. And so that's kind of protecting the future investments and guiding the future investments. Because when we potentially could be asked for $10 billion, I think they're most likely to be more inclined to recommend the projects that fit with the preliminary deployment plan than those that do not. Because we would be denying ourselves the synergies if we were to do that. So it's evolving. The work kicked off in November. For the most part, we're intending to wrap up this work by at least the technical component of the work by about March of next year. Looking at her because she's the consultant who's doing the work for this and also for the 6-year program. So if you're having difficult questions, they're going to go to Dalia. But we basically want to kind of wrap up as close to next March because our next call for projects will be May of next year. And we want to have this information available for anyone who wants to submit a funding request for a BRT related project at that time. But obviously, a 6-year program is a 2-year cycle. So if they're not ready next year, then 2 years after that and 2 years after that, there'll always be another opportunity to do that. But every time we want it to be fitting with this. We also believe that us putting money on a project helps the individual project sponsors to leverage that funding to get other funding, notably federal funding, which means, maybe for every 100 million that we put into a project, a project sponsor might be able to get another 90 million from the feds, which pushes our money a lot further.
Can I ask, what is the ridership of the BRT that you have now?
Well, like I say, 4 of the 5 lines are in development, so there is no
Right.
ridership right now.
Oh, what I thought, right, so one,
It remains to be seen.
Right.
For the Metro Rail service, which is in Arlington, Alexandria, I don't have numbers off the top of my head, but we can get back to you on that.
yeah, I just wondered what,
We can certainly get back to you on that. Well, obviously, all transit ridership has been affected by the pandemic and the post-pandemic recovery. Transit has recovered better than rail, by and large. And many jurisdictions are actually now seeing higher ridership than they saw pre-pandemic, and others are getting close. But we'll check that.
okay.
I have a question.
Sorry, thank you, yeah,
Yes, sir.
please.
Yeah, in this BRT, is there any consideration for the Western Loudon community?
Do you have the?
I see all these are in
Yeah,
the
Right.
metro DC area, but nothing going
right.
further west.
Being a Percival resident myself, I feel your pain. But as of right now, Western Loudon, there are no lines in here. And really the simple reason for that is for BRT to be successful, it needs density, and needs density along the line of the route as well as at each end. So obviously as you get further west and further southwest in the region, that density falls off to levels below which we believe BRT is going to be viable. It's not to say other forms of transit won't be viable, but BRT itself, the solid blue lines is where, we'll be looking initially. But everything's going to radiate out. So if urban and suburban sprawl and continues, and indeed not even sprawl, but if specific activity centres, even in the rural parts of the region, continue to grow, then they could become viable, hubs for future BRT. But right now we don't see it.
You say the density is in population?
Yeah,
Or
the way we're looking at it right now, we do it as part of the work that the consultant team is doing. We're looking at across the country, as well as around the region and the state, at what sort of densities are associated with existing lines.
Okay.
And we're looking at density in terms of the residential density, population, and the number of jobs.
Right.
So we kind of combine those into a blended metric to give us an overall density. And then we can see where existing BRT lines and what their density is, and when we can look to see what densities we have in this region, looking all the way out to 2045, not just today. And so that kind of helps understand where the densities might be high enough for a BRT system to work. Now, densities being high enough alone is not sufficient, but it's pretty much a prerequisite to start with a BRT line. As you know, NVTA does not do zoning, land use planning. That's the purview
Right.
of the localities. But I think as part of this work, we'll be collecting information that we will share with your staff, so that they can see, transparently from us, where we think density is high enough and where we think it isn't high enough, and possibly identify how much more density you need in a particular corridor in order to kind of move from not feasible to feasible, which might help you with land use decisions. But we will not do land use decisions for you. That's not our role. But we can provide, the relationship between land use and transportation is undeniable. And so we kind of need to work together in that sense to kind of address that.
Yeah, the reason I ask that is about economic development that occurs in the Western Loudoun where jobs are created there, but the people that need the jobs aren't able to get there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in Western Loudoun and other more rural parts, that there's likely to be a role for transit. It's just not likely to be bus rapid transit. You're delivering workers, say, to a vineyard on a bus that's running every 15 minutes throughout the day doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Obviously, you can see the costs far outweigh the benefits of the ridership that service would provide.
Well, in Leesburg, they've just annexed 300 plus acres into the town for Microsoft. So that's going to generate 40 million, a large amount of money.
Yeah.
So the workers that may live in Percival may have a difficult time getting the job. That's why I'm asking the question.
I mean, it's dynamic. We don't show this going to Leesburg even at the present time.
Right.
We're going to Ashburn and Stirling with our work right now. But I mean, that's not the end of the story, but that's the starting point for us.
And can I add, that's a great point. And to that, Mayor, I would note, BRT doesn't preclude Metro. We've gotten some comments about that. It doesn't mean that there were no Metro extension. However, we did want to have something that was high capacity transit that could be on board a lot sooner than Metro extension, and give us some flexibility. Like, while you don't see it today, if the densities and the other things that are needed to have a successful BRT station and BRT service is there, we hope to build into this study avenues that could get us there, and we can extend further out, as Keith noted.
I just wanted it for consideration.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Take away to your question about I think it's your question about ridership.
Yeah.
Yes.
For Metro.
The March 2019 ridership on Metroway, that was daily ridership.
Yeah.
The daily ridership as reported on this Google website that Troy is looking at is 2,431 in March of 2019. And that 1.34% increase over the previous time period, I assume. So I can't remember when that became operational. It may have been like 2015 or something like that. And it's being extended to the north in Arlington, and Alexandria is looking to extend and enhance it in the southern end, related to the developments around Potomac Yard.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the arena developments, because there are going to be developments there, whatever the shape or form of that finally is, but yeah, they are looking for us to help them fund some improvement and extension of that
Oh, I'm
service.
sure.
Yeah, I think that ridership isn't back to the 19 levels yet, just like everything else.
Right.
It's like a 1600.
Right.
And did you have a question?
Or just a quick comment. So the 28A is a bus service that already goes along part of the BRT line. And since 2019, at least what I heard was that ridership is up by 120%.
Okay.
So that's been a very popular line.
Yeah, there are some lines showing incredible increases relative to pre-pandemic.
Great.
I mean, this region is still booming, but it's booming in different ways.
Right.
I think, to be honest, it's probably been to the benefit of the more suburban part of the region than the central core, which I think is probably struggling still. But you know, if my CFO was here, he'd be talking about our sales tax revenue, and we're not seeing any harm in our sales tax revenue. You know, so economic activity is still occurring here, and you probably see that from your own accounts as well. I think I've probably done this one today. Do I have any more slides? Oh, okay, just on phasing. So we're in phase one now, which will continue through early summer. We're basically in a public engagement mode right now. We started with the perception survey. Some of the stuff that we learned from the perception survey, including the thing about crime, we're going to examine that a bit more deeply in some focus groups, which are actually going to taking place on Tuesday and Wednesday next week. The focus groups are not statistically, significant, but they do allow us to have conversations in depth with segmented groups of the population to explore feelings on particular topics of our choosing. So this is the first wave of focus groups. We'll probably do some more later in the work. And then following the focus groups, we'll be developing and releasing an online survey, which would be the major point at which Northern Virginians can talk to us about things related to bus rapid transit. And we're already planning how we're going to do that. We haven't designed the survey yet, but we will have as many as a couple of dozen pop-up events around the region where we typically go to places to interact with people who do not typically fill out online surveys for whatever reason. As part of our equity core value, which Sri mentioned earlier, we want to hear from everyone. I want at least give everyone an opportunity to talk to us. And going to where people are has been proven time and time again to be the best way to do that. We can't go to all 2 million. So we are choosing to go to the people who are least likely to engage with us, we think, through an online survey. So that is all coming up in late spring, early summer. And then at some point, we haven't scheduled it yet, we will have a work session with NVTA authority members to share some of this information back with them, and then to seek further guidance and input from them as we move forward into phase two, the analysis part of the work, and then more public engagement after the analysis is finished this time next year on basically what we found and what we're not sure whether it be recommendations or the pathway that we see going forwards. And then we'll close out the work in October of next year.
And that online survey, is that something you want us to circulate, put on our
Thank
social
you.
media, whatever, our calendar?
Thank you.
Usually.
Great idea. We're going to take you up on it. No,
Also,
we have one of our staff members organises a regional gathering of all the PIO folks across,
sure.
at least the transportation PIO folks across Northern Virginia, across all the jurisdictions and agencies who are actively involved in that. And so we will be reaching out to them, authority members, PCAC members. You all have your own constituency, and we want to hear from them. Frankly, we want to hear from them, good or bad. Just want people to feel as though they're part of this.
How do you select people for the focus group?
Okay, so I think we're doing it with an external firm, a different one to the firm that did the perception survey, and I think they have a database of people who are willing to do this sort of research. We specify and they formalize, that the consultant formalizes the cross section that we're looking for in terms of demographics or travel behaviors. So I think with this one next week, we've got a couple of groups who will be folks who declare themselves ahead of time to be transit riders, and another couple of focus groups among folks who are not transit riders, but would at least be among that group I mentioned earlier, who have an open mind about becoming a transit rider. Obviously, if someone says, never am I going on a bus, there's not really a whole lot of point us talking to them. We don't need to speak to a cross-section of everybody, but we do want to reach those who don't typically use transit, but are receptive to the idea of doing it if it worked for them. So that's the major split that we use, and then we try to keep a good geographic match for the region, so that they're not all in Arlington or not all in Western Malvern. We'd like to get a representation, but they're not large groups. I think 15, 20 tops in each of the 4 groups, so less than 100 people. But they do some, they're pre-screened before they're invited. The day before their focus group, they'll do like what the consultant calls homework exercise. So that they'll give the consultant some information ahead of time, which can be used by the moderator, and then the event itself will be moderated. These are now done virtually. We used to do them in person, but it's actually a lot more effective to do it remotely. There is like a stipend that they're paid to do. We don't, we understand people are giving up a couple of hours of their time just for the focus group, not to mention the homework assignment beforehand. So, we recognize there's a value of time that, needs to be recompensed. So that's all covered. So we don't want anyone to say, I'm not going to do it because you're not going to pay me. It's not pay as such. It's more stipend. And then, it's quite exhilarating. How the moderator does it, I do not know. There's so many voices juggling at the same time, as well as having a bunch of us, behind the screen, as it were, interacting with her during the event. And we do 2 each day, and there'll be like a couple of hours between the first one and the second one. So we can actually change our approach for the second one each evening based on, so maybe something we heard and want to explore more deeply on the next one. So it's really real-time interactive stuff for us as well as the participants. So that's a picture.
Right, anyone else?
So I've done a bit over time.
Did you have more?
No, I think I've done that.
I would just like to note that the authority is moving. Our March 14th meeting will be the last meeting in this space. We're moving about 1.1 miles away. It's the Park Tower, directly across the street from the Dunn-Loring Metro Station. So we will keep you posted on that. So after the March meeting, that's the last meeting in this space. Now, our new space is going to need a little work. So we're going to be temporarily housed on the 2nd floor. And then when our space is fully outfitted, we will be on the 6th floor. But March 14th, last meeting here.
So PCAC next meeting, March 27th.
Will not be here. Yes.
My
Uh,
car
unless
will
you're
drive
gonna
here.
do
I know,
This is your
but
last meeting
Yeah.
here.
I'll try to remember.
Yeah.
Your next meeting, we're going to take advantage of flexibility allowed, hold a limited number of
Virtual meeting.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, so
Yeah.
it will be, we're gonna try and do a
So,
virtual on
we
March
will give
27th.
you a link to the meeting.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Because we don't know what.
We'll be
boxes we're
moving.
gonna get, whether we'll unpack them or whether the
Okay.
communications works. or-
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Okay, that sounds good. All right. All right, is there a
Yeah,
motion to adjourn?
volunteers, so.
Okay, excellent. Good to see everybody. Good to see you.
But I didn't hear from
Well, you see the red tape, like, yeah.
If there's gonna be any like actions that I think that I'll take